therapies. So we will use all those and understand about immune diseases today. So first, what you need to know about is autoimmunity. What is autoimmunity? What is autoimmune diseases? And the types, and at least few examples you need to remember. Okay, there are two types: organ specific and systemic. Okay, specific to our organs, and some are the whole system, systemic, whole body. Okay, and for the autoimmunity or autoimmune diseases, there are a few mechanisms how it happens. Okay, so you'll understand a few mechanisms. You need to remember the names of mechanism and the concept or the examples also. And here I try to give some of the important of the big class of autoimmune disease, about I think two or three examples I tried to explain. And then we will try to also list about the treatment or management of autoimmune diseases. How are the therapies or treatment, like methods or strategies used in autoimmune disease treatment? Okay. So this is the list of references, and I think the first one is the good one, and there is a brief, comprehensive paper that gives you understanding of autoimmune disease. This paper is also fine if you want, if you have short time, but generally I would recommend the first one and these two books for your references. Okay. So the next slide, as we move now, what is autoimmunity and autoimmune disease? So now, like when our immune system fights to the antigens, that is our normal autoimmunity. But what happens when there is because of our genes, okay? Our MHC or HLA, you have already studied. If the genes and there is an infection and there is because of other environmental factor causes the breakdown of this immune defense that leads to the autoimmune disease. Okay, so this is the autoimmunity. Okay, so now you know the functions of immune system is to defense, right? Immune defense against the infection, so that we can stay in the homeostasis, like we have maintain the self and non-self antigens with, and we tolerate those so that we can divide the antigens and stay in the normal state. Okay, so but there are other situations that our immune system can surveillance. Okay, like if there is a persistent infection, tumor cells, so this is also how immune system also behave by surveillance, by looking, watching out this infection or any tumor cells. Okay, so basically it does the concept of defense. Okay, now when you talk about tolerance, immune tolerance is like the specific immune responses, like unresponsive, does not respond to any like the infections or anything. It doesn't respond to anything to the antigen, and then there is a exposure of lymphocytes to that antigen. Okay, so I will explain to you in the next slide with the pictorial understanding. So all individuals are tolerant to their own antigens, means you can tolerate your own antigens. That is self-tolerance. Okay, tolerance is not genetically programmed. It's not by your genes. Okay, from your family, like I mean parents. Okay, the breakdown or failure of self-tolerance maintaining mechanism results in autoimmune disease, meaning the breakdown, or if your immune system does not tolerate your self, okay, antigens, it does not recognize or does not um, it recognize in another way, okay, pathogenic way, then it's cause you the autoimmune disease. Okay, now when we talk about disorder or disease about immune system, there may be, like you might have heard about immunodeficiency diseases, autoimmune disease. There are two different. One is the failure of immune system. Okay, one is the reaction of the immune system. So the reaction is autoimmune diseases. Okay, So when I talk to you about the tolerance are of two, like here is central tolerance and peripheral tolerance, okay? Central tolerance basically happens at the thymus for the T cell sites and the bone marrow for the B cell sites. The mechanism in central is mostly clonal deletion, okay? Is completely deletion or negative selections, okay? Whereas on the peripheral, that systemic tissues, the site is everywhere in the body, okay? Can be both T cells and B cells. The mechanisms are energy, cell death, and immunodeviations. We will explain each in the next slide. So basically this gives you the summary of the immune whole system in terms of tolerance, okay? Let's first look at the central tolerance. Now you have the lymphocytes precursor here in your bone marrow or thymus, okay? Then you have the lymphocytes here. It recognizes the self-antigens, okay? So now the first way that our immune system tolerate these antigens, our self-antigen is they will directly delete it, okay? That is apoptosis or also known as negative selection. And then there's another approach that our immune system tolerate our self-antigen. They try to change the receptors so that it will not be pathogenic, okay? And there is another one, as it recognizes the antigen, there is a development of regulatory T lymphocytes, okay? Like CD4 T cells only. So then it passes through the peripheral tolerance, okay? Now, when we talk about the peripheral tolerance, as the mature lymphocytes pass through the peripheral tissue, it tries to recognize the self-antigens, okay? And the mechanism in peripheral tolerance, remember there are three mechanisms in peripheral tolerance. Number one is energy. That means it is not active, it's not dead, okay? It kind of no response, okay? It doesn't have any response to the system, okay? Absence of normal immune response, okay? That is energy, number one. Number two is the same like in the central tolerance. They have a deletion or the apoptosis, or also called negative selection, okay? It will just delete. And there is another one, the suppression, regulated by TRG, okay? These lymphocytes. So there are three in each. It's like in this central case, deletions and editing, okay, and T regulatory T lymphocytes, okay. And here in peripheral tolerance, one mechanism is energy, apoptosis, deletion, and the suppression. So if we go on to the next slides, we look into each again here. So to understand T cell tolerance, let's consider about the first one. In the thymus, you have the immature T cells, okay, and recognizes the self-antigen over here. It will just delete this. So that is deletion, that is negative selection. And in other instant, they tolerate by development of regulatory T cells, okay, and then they pass to the peripheral system, okay. And in the other hand, in the peripheral T cells tolerance, okay, normally like this one here. Okay, so in normal T cell response, we have your, like this could be your self antigen over here. Your T cell recognizes it with different co-stimulatory receptors. Okay, here CD28, B7, these receptors. So there is a immune response like effector and memory T cells. Okay, but what happens in the tolerance is number one, as I told you earlier, energy. That means no response. Okay, functional unresponsiveness. There is no response at all, even though the T cells binds to your self antigen. Okay, there is no response. And another one is by suppression. In terms of suppression, it could binds with more than 2 or 3 cells, okay, like self-antigen with the regulatory T cells. It tried to regulate both your T cells and your the antigen, and then there is it will block the activation of this process. So this is how immune system tolerance, okay. The last one is deletion. It will just directly delete it, or apoptosis. Okay. Now, now we talk about T cells tolerance. This is the B cells tolerance. Okay. So just consider the pictures first. Okay, Kap. So now in the situation when the self antigen is like have a high avidity, I guess you remember when we talked about avidity and affinity last class. So when the self-antigen here binds to your reactive B cells with a high avidity, either it happens in two steps of tolerance. One is apoptosis, that's directly delayed, or it edits, okay, expression of new IgG light chains. So it edits into different and forms a new non-select self-reactive B cells. But whereas if the self-antigen has a low avidity, for example here, okay, it reduces receptor expression and becomes an unresponsive, okay, energetic B cells. Now, in the peripheral tolerance, as it have as the mature lymphocytes come in contact with the self antigens, it either have a functional inactivation, that is energy, or deletion, or regulatory inhibitors. Okay, so this is the three ways. I mean, like two ways of tolerance: B cells and T cells tolerance, and central tolerance and peripheral tolerance. Okay. Kochai Makeup, this is the most important part of this topic. Okay. You need to remember like the tolerance mechanism in each. Like this slides gives you the summary of the next 2 or 3 slides. The first one is deletion, that is negative selection, or the apoptosis, and it recognizes the self-antigen. So now if you break down the system of our immune system, then it will cause you autoimmunity. So this is what explains here. Now, if the failure of immune tolerance, okay, if the balance is broken between these two parts, then you have the pathogenic, like control response to the pathogens, reaction to your self antigens, okay, then it causes you the autoimmune diseases. Now here this examples explains to you. You see now, what do you mean by tolerance? You see a baby looks at the mirror and he's very active, right? Active? No. I see it, but I don't react to it. You see at the mirror, you just see it and it smiles like this. But like, for example, cat, when it looks at the mirror, it's very active. I see it, but I react to it. So it is how autoimmune does this. Now imagine this is you and your self-antigen over here. You see it and you react. It will cause you autoimmune diseases, okay? So this also explains a brief of the earlier slides here. So you have the invading antigen coming in and the antibodies are formed, that is our normal response. And then antibodies removes the antigens and we have the memory antibodies to protect in the near future. But now in the autoimmune disease, we produces, like immune system produces the antibodies for your self antigens, okay? Then antibodies attacks your self antigens areas, then causing you inflammation, tissues, and damage, okay? So this is autoimmune disease. So now autoimmunity and immune response against self, as I told you, antigens, okay? The immune system can differentiate between self and non-self, okay? It is mediated by autoreactive T cells and reactive B cells, okay? Causing the autoantibodies. This is the same one. Tolerance can be like deletion, clonal deletion, okay, or negative selection, or functional inactivation, that is clonal energy, okay. Okay, remember that autoimmune response do not necessarily imply the pathogenic condition of the autoimmune disease, okay. The response of our immune system does not means that you have an autoimmune disease, okay. So autoimmune reactions are organs affected. They affect the organs in human. Involvement of autoantigens, okay, involvement of immune responses, and also in terms of immune reactions or the effector mechanism, it's very similar to the hypersensitivity reactions, okay, especially type 2, 3, and 4, okay. The presence of type 1 is not yet known, okay, but basically the only type 2, 3, and 4 is involved in the immune reactions, okay. So now let's differentiate between autoimmunity and autoimmune disease, okay? The existence of harmless self-reactive lymphocytes and antibodies. This is autoimmunity. Now, dependent on genetic, viral, or hormonal factors, autoimmune disease. Autoimmunity, potentially reversible, features several tissue damage in autoimmune disease, okay? So autoimmunity is higher in older age, yeah, as we age. The clinical symptoms normally appears in autoimmune disease. Now significance unclear, possibly physiological. Yeah, autoimmunity, the significance we don't know, maybe possibly physiological. Uh, so protracted course, with the time course, it might be lethal or fatal, means to die, like it causes the death, okay? Familiar clustering means it clusters within one family, okay? Now let's go to the main part, autoimmune disease, okay? What are autoimmune diseases? A condition that occurs when the immune system mistakenly attacks, destroys your healthy body tissue. It's called autoimmune disease, okay? The main mechanism is breakdown or failure of your tolerance, the two tolerance system, right? Central and peripheral tolerance, okay? B cells or T cells mediated. When it is breakdown, you have the pathomechanism of autoimmune diseases, okay? Normally, the consequence is like the tissue damage or loss of the functions of the particular the cell activation or cell proliferation, okay? So the self-tolerance, which we talk about, is energy, okay? The breakdown of the self-tolerance. So when we talk about the autoimmune diseases type, right, you have to remember the type, like organ-specific and non-organ-specific, that is systemic, okay? So in the organ-specific, autoimmune like attacks the self-antigens of a given organ. It results in the damage of organ structure or the function, okay? Treatment is focused on the transplantation, so replacement of the organ functions, okay? So widespread self-antigens targets the autoimmune, okay? So this is antigens that are widespread, damages affects the blood vessels or nuclei, okay? Treatment is aimed to inhibit excessive activation. So it's based on inhibit the excessive activation of the immune system. So here are the examples that I have listed. So please do remember the names, okay, of each, the organ-specific autoimmune and systemic autoimmune diseases, okay. This picture would explain very well here, like this graph, this drawing shows that as it goes below, it becomes more systemic, okay? And this blue says that this is like SLE, okay? Systemic lupus erythematosus. So is one of the most systemic autoimmune disease, okay? And then goes up and becomes more organ specific, like Graves' disease, like it's about thyroid, okay? So this gives you a picture of how it looks like, the organ and systemic. When we talk about the systemic, it principally connected to the connective tissues, blood vessels, vascular or other disorders, okay? So when we look at the geography of the epidemiology of the disease, okay, mostly it affects, like it seems to affect the female gender than the male gender, okay, most of the autoimmune diseases and the ratios of its occurrence, okay, worldwide. So in to sum up, like about the basic concept of autoimmune, like it is female predominance, mostly the young adults, a chronic cause with the time, okay, because of suppression of your immune system, okay, your self-tolerance is broken down. Intercurrent infections, maybe caused by the infections also, and the definitely it is auto antibodies, okay, overlapping syndromes that may be systemic forms, okay. So this explains you the whole tolerance and the cause of autoimmunity, okay. So as I told you, thymus and the bone marrow, the site for your lymphocytes, and there is a mechanism of tolerance, central, peripheral, and the Treg, the regulatory T cells, and you have the autoantibodies, okay, and your physiological autoimmunity, there is no damage, maintains the normal state. But if you have any genetic predisposition or environmental factor, then there is the dysregulation of your immunity, causing a pathological autoimmunity. So that leads to an autoimmune disease, okay? Like pathogenesis of autoimmunity, like in this case, we just look at the